Today we are making Kransekage, which can best be described as a marzipan wreath cake. The basic concept is you create rings that you stack on top of each other to create this tower. This recipe can be a little bit tricky because it takes a little while to shape all of these rings, but we did create a stencil that you can download and print out to make it a little bit easier. Other than being a little bit more difficult to shape, you don't need a lot of ingredients for this, and it's an amazing showstopper for your next event. We like to make it for New Year's as a celebration. And fun fact, I had a Kransekage at my wedding. Enough talking, let's get started.
The night before making the Kransekage, we are going to make the dough. So we are mixing together almond flour and powdered sugar in a bowl. Definitely recommend starting with a large bowl so you have enough room to mix everything together. The next step is to add a teaspoon of almond extract just to give it that extra almond flavor. And then we start the process of adding in egg white, which will help the dough come together. I like to add the egg white 1 tablespoon at a time and mix in between just to make sure I'm not adding too much. The total amount of egg white corresponds to about 3 eggs worth. What you're looking for at the end is a dough that looks sort of like sugar cookie dough, maybe a little bit stickier. And then I'm going to cover this and let it rest in the fridge overnight.
It's the next day and the dough has rested overnight in the fridge. Now we're going to start the shaping process of the rings that make up this tower. So we created a stencil that you can print out from our recipe that has the size of each of the rings that you want to make, or you can refer to the individual measurements of each of the logs that you would then form into a ring. Either way works. Let's start rolling this dough into logs.
I like to prep my surface with a silicone mat. If your dough is really sticky, you can use powdered sugar to help roll this out. I'm aiming for a thickness of about 1 to 1.5 centimeters in diameter. And then to use the stencil that we have on the website, I take parchment paper and lay that over the stencil. Before transferring over the log that we rolled out, we like to press down on the side that is closest to you with the palm of your hand, and this helps to make that signature triangular top that you see in the Kransekage and makes it taller when you stack it as well. And now it's time to shape the ring. So I'm taking the edge closest to me and making sure that is facing up, and then shaping that around the stencil, the outermost ring, and making sure that the interior edge of the ring is following that outline. Now's the time to fix any of the seams. You can run a little water along it to smooth it out, and also make sure that you have a ring that is as even as possible. The way that we use the stencil is by having that piece of parchment paper that you're going to bake the rings on, and then just shifting the stencil around so that you don't have to move any of the rings at the end. You will have to move the whole piece of parchment paper, but we do find that that is easier. The rest of the shaping is really just repeating the same steps over and over again. If using the stencil, just keep moving into the smaller and smaller rings and shifting that parchment paper around. Just make sure when you are shaping the ring on the stencil that you align the inner edge of the ring with the outline on the stencil. We can fit around 5 of the large rings on one sheet, and then we just transfer them over to a baking sheet, and then they're going to dry out at room temperature for around 20 minutes.
While the first batch of rings is drying out, I'm going to preheat the oven to 390 degrees Fahrenheit.
We also wanted to show a few other ways of using the stencil if you prefer to bake on a different surface than parchment paper. So you can always shape the ring on the stencil and then transfer it using a palette knife, or just a regular butter knife is fine too. You just want to make sure that you are adjusting the rings if they become misshapen at all. And you can always redo rings. I redid one here because I didn't like how it turned out. And at the end, you should have 10 rings and enough dough for a ball to make the top. So it's 11 tiers total. After the first batch of rings have finished drying at room temperature, we run a little bit of water along the inside edge. It just helps to prevent any wrinkling that might occur. You might notice that we are baking this in 2 batches. It just helps to make sure that everything is even and there's no inconsistency within the oven. So once the first batch goes in, we can prep the second batch for baking. It'll bake for about 10 minutes. Just keep an eye on the rings, especially the different sizes, because they might cook at different times. What you're looking for is an even golden color, and the tops will be slightly more golden brown. Once they've all baked, transfer to a cooling rack and let them fully cool at room temperature.
The rings have been cooling for about an hour, hour and a half, so now it's time to make icing and ice the top of the rings. All you're going to need for this is some powdered sugar, a bowl just to mix some water in there, and I like to use a sandwich bag, and I just put it in a glass to transfer the icing in there, and that's what I'm going to use to pipe the icing onto the rings. Now, today I am going to use water for the icing. Ideally, you can use pasteurized egg whites so that it sets really hard. I just don't have any today, so water will be fine. I'll just make it very thick and it'll mostly set at room temperature. So let's get started.
To make the icing, I'm mixing powdered sugar with water just until I get a thick icing, and then transferring that to the piping bag that I'm going to use. To ice the rings, you just want to create a zigzag pattern across the top. It is better if the icing is thicker, as it helps stop it from running down the sides, but you just want to repeat this until all of the rings have been iced.
While the icing is setting, I'm going to melt a little bit of chocolate. This is going to act as the glue when we stack the rings in a tower.
After the icing has set for about 20 minutes, it is finally assembly time. So we brush the bottoms of each of the rings with chocolate and then stack them in size order.
Ta-da! I already know this is going to be good. I've made it many times, many recipe tests, but let's try it. Perfect almond flavor. It is really sweet, but it's exactly what you want. Let us know if you make Kransekage. We would love to see your photos. Tag us on Instagram, send us an email, whatever you want. And see you for the next recipe. Bye. Showstopper. So fun.
It's gonna make all the difference, I'm telling you.
Now we're going to sharp. Okay. We're not gonna do that. We stack them up. Should I eat more? Probably not.